Chrissa, before to start, I would like first of all to say some things about you. You are in Hania, and please, because you're not an academic, so person, you work in the real field in museums. So keep a couple of minutes to say what we do. I'm really surprised. I'm very happy to meet you and know what you do, not only at the level of Museum of Hania, which is very, very recent, very modern, but also at the European level, your role in your working groups. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, and good morning to everyone. I will start sharing. It's okay, I guess, yeah? Okay. So, as Professor Chuzzo said, I am working at the Foret of Antiquities of Hanyang, which is supervised by the Hellenic Ministry of Culture. And among my responsibilities, I also work on temporary exhibitions and public engagement through learning activities with a special focus on sustainability. So this presentation will now make the focus on museums as the main institutions, cultural institutions, which are hosting, preserving, and diffusing the knowledge about our cultural heritage. And basically, my presentation will be organized around these themes. Why should museums take a stance? Which barriers inhibit the sustainable transformation of museums? What might sustainability mean for museums? And some examples of implementation. Which are levers that optimize the sustainable transformation of museums? And why museums should see climate crisis as an opportunity for them. I would like to begin this presentation by this quote from a young person who participated in a project at the Manchester Museum called Inheriting the Anthropocene. And it was a project about young persons working after school on a project which has to, at the end of the project, give a display case with items that could represent the Anthropocene. So one researcher asked one of these young persons, what does it feel like to be inheriting the Anthropocene? And this person answered, it's like being given the Mona Lisa and then realizing that someone's drawn a mustache on it. I think it's a very impressive quote, especially coming from a young person, because it is this young audience and this generation that will be affected more by climate crisis in the future. So we need to act now. We need to be involved in climate action now for these generations to come. As we have already heard, climate change or climate crisis is becoming a constant appearance in our everyday vocabulary. We hear it all the time in news, we read about it online. So more or less, the majority of us think that climate change is everybody's business. But is it also business for museums? We have something like 104,000 museums worldwide. So is climate crisis something that really museums need to care about? It is only in 2022 that the official definition for museums by ICOM included, after many years of negotiations and drafts, the term sustainability. There is a lot of criticism when the term was introduced in the new museum definition, because mostly museum professionals thought that this is very vaguely stated and actually doesn't really give a role to museums or doesn't give a framework within the museum can act for a climate crisis. Nevertheless, what is important is that at least the term exists in this definition. What about culture and museums in the international framework on climate crisis? We know that climate crisis is not a recent phenomenon, and moreover is not a scientific phenomenon. It's also a very complex interaction that affects and impacts in different aspects of our life, from biology to economy and to society. So all these impacts have been already noted as early as in the late 70s. It is only in 1987, with the Brundtland report, that culture appears for the first time, although vaguely stated, as an important contributor to the fight against climate crisis. And it is only in 2010 that culture is finally recognized as the fourth pillar of sustainability. We all know about our most important blueprint for climate action today, which is Agenda 2030 and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that came after the COP Union in 2015. And this is actually our roadmap towards sustainability. In green, I have highlighted some of the initiatives that ICOM, as the international responsible for the museum work, has done in the last decades. So it is in 2018 that ICOM first established a group on sustainability, to be now transformed in 2023 into ICOM Sustain, which is the International Committee on Museums and Sustainable Development. ICOM now has a strategic plan that has an horizon up to 2028 and is making a great effort in order to internationally motivate museums towards action about climate crisis. So this brings us to our first question: why should museums take a stance? I can tell you many reasons why. There are basically 10 important reasons, and I will most explicitly present here 3 of them that I consider that are the most important. Some of the reasons have to do with the idiosyncrasy of museums themselves as social, educative, and at the heart of the society, institutions that are recognized as very trustful. But basically, one of the main reasons that museums should be prepared against the impacts of climate crisis is one of the main reasons. As we have already seen, climate crisis can affect everybody and everything, and nobody and nothing is immune to the impacts of climate crisis. Museums are, in the last decades, facing severe extreme weather events that also give a potential risk to their premises. I give you this example from the Leeds Industrial Museum, which suffered from extensive floods in 2015. The level of the flood reached 2.5 meters, which was approximately 3 times higher than the Great Flood of 1866. What is most important to understand behind this reason why is that museums have not yet analyzed the impacts of climate crisis. The NEMO survey, which stands for the Network of European Museum Organization, conducted an extensive survey in more than 300 museums around Europe to find out that only 69.2% have not analyzed the impacts of climate crisis that potentially can threaten their premises. And the majority of them also said that they are not situated in a high-risk geographical area, which actually means a lack of knowledge about the actual impacts of climate crisis. This is a very good example of how extreme temperatures that now most European places suffer, and we have every day in the news all these high temperature records in different towns around Europe. This is a wax sculpture which is kept in Victoria and Albert Museum in London. It's The Prisoner by Michelangelo. So it is a unique masterpiece, very sensitive to high temperatures, that the museum has to remove it from display in the summer months and often well into the autumn, as it is at risk of melting. This heavily impacts not only on the collection of the museum, but also on visitor experience, because means that visitors are unable to experience one of the highlights of the collection for at least 4 months of each year, or sometimes even longer. Another basic reason why is that museums are themselves unsustainable consumers, thus they are part of the problem. Maybe they are not contributing so much to emissions like the industry, but still, if we see the annual reports, for example, for the British museums, there is 21,356 metric tons of GHG emissions in the UK for the year 2023. So it is an important amount. And for example, another audit for the Museum of Ethnography in Switzerland, in Geneva, realized that only from visitors' travel, 55% of the total amount of GHG emissions of the museums is accounting for 488 metric tons. So this is very important for museums to realize that they are part of the problems. And finally, the key to all these reasons why museums should take a stance for and against the climate crisis is because they should demonstrate their relevance to societal concerns. It is one of their ethical responsibilities, taking in account that the majority of people worldwide are thinking on climate crisis on a weekly basis or even every day. And if we take it to Europe, 77%, almost 8 in 10 European citizens, considering climate change is a very serious problem. And similar views comes from other parts of the world like Australia and the US. So which are the barriers that inhibit the sustainable transformation of museums? First of all, museums are facing a new challenge. And most of the times they lack the framework how to see themselves positioned in this crisis, and they don't have adequate tools to work against this crisis. Taking in account that only 10.3% of museums are aware of local and regional or national climate policies, this is a very serious issue that has to do on how our governments and policy makers are diffusing information to every sector and how they can activate these sectors for and against climate crisis. Museums as well have long participated in an estrangement from the nature. What this means that now, as a society, we live in this divide between culture and nature. And this means that nature was always the background of human activity and always viewed as a source, unlimited source of materials that we could use for our lives. This is a very crucial point because for many years now, not to say centuries now, museums are also supporting this divide. As institutions also, they are trapped in a way in a vessel of trust, neutrality, and professionalism. What I mean with these words. Neutrality refers to actually the idea that museums should be, in a sense, apolitical, that they cannot take a stance in a very important societal and environmental issues, especially if they are heavily polarized. And this is because they are afraid that perhaps they can lose the trust public opinion is having about them. And then comes professionalism, that museums are indeed slow changers. And what they do, they know to do it in a very traditional way for centuries now. And they are not very prone to changes. They are not easy to adapt to new ideas and new changes in the mindset that they have already set. For example, as we discussed about materials and their conversation in the previous presentation, some museums are afraid to make more flexible environmental protocols for their collections because they think that they are not going to be trustful enough for lenders of other institutions. And of course, one last impediment is that both museums and staff usually are found themselves in a survival mode in the sense of economic restrictions or staff reduction. So for many museum professionals to deal also with this delicate issue of climate crisis is like another cherry on the top of the everyday work that they have to do. So what might sustainability mean for museums? First of all, what is very important if a museum wants to get into the green transformation is to commit. But committing is not an easy thing because it actually involves this shift in the mindset to do things utterly different than the traditional mode that has been applied for so long now. And the truly sustainable museum does not only address one area of these two many areas you are seeing in this slide, but sees that these areas are interwoven in an overall sustainable approach, which sometimes is very difficult because from one side you have what and how museum operates, which is the inside dimension and deals with the infrastructure, the building of the museum, or people, the staff working within the museum, and of course the outside dimension, which has to do with the programming on the museum. So how a museum can, in the same time, focus in all these different action areas and how it can really make a difference in a climate crisis. I have selected some examples that are only a handful for different categories, just to show you what museums, especially in Europe, are doing today. And I will start with this example about building and actually rethinking building strategies. This is the new wing of Design Museum in Ghent, in Belgium, which will be entirely made by the city's waste. This is a radical experiment in sustainability, circularity, and community-driven design that it is hoped to redefine how we build, engage, and innovate in the cultural sector. The Ghent waste brick is a new low-carbon and locally produced facade brick that requires no kiln. Thus, we don't need high temperatures to burn and make the bricks are usually done in the industry. It is made from lime-based binders and recycled aggregates, including waste, concrete, and industrial glass. Collection management. This is what I said before about lowering or making more flexible the standards of environmental conditions for preserving the collection within the galleries and the storage facilities of museums. But if this collection management involves adjusting environmental protocols to more flexible standards, like did the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, so that it saved at least 20,000 euros per month. So sometimes it's not only about making good for the environment, but it also making good for the economic situation of the museum itself. Procurement. Most museums, or the majority of them, have restaurants and cafes that now decide to operate in a more ethical, eco-friendly, and responsible way. So this is how the Natural History Museum in London has visualized its idea of sustainable consumption at the museum's cafe, where the catering service help visitors make an informed choice by labeling items purchased from the fridges, where A label means the most climate-friendly choice, or E label which is worse, means that the least environmentally friendly option. Shopping also is a very important operation in museums because also is linked to its financial health. But now most shops in museums are thinking of sustainable alternatives. For example, in all Tate galleries run a circular economy t-shirt project. People can bring an old t-shirt to any of the shops, and in partnership with a recycling company, they make sure it is recycled or reused. And as a thank you, customers get a discount for a new Tate t-shirt. Biodiversity. You may think that dealing with biodiversity is something that is only for museums of science or natural history museums. But this is a very impressive initiative taken by Musée d'Orsay and Musée d'Orangerie in Paris, France, in collaboration with the town of Argenteuil. And what did they do with this project is to take the Impressionism paintings, the paintings of the 19th century kept in the collections of this museum, in an effort to revegetate a part of the Seine riverbanks at Argenteuil. So this is like an actual contribution of a museum to a sustainable action that has to do with biodiversity. Travel, especially visitor travels, is accounting as an indirect emission under the scope 3. And this is something for museums that can be very difficultly controlled. It's not something that can easily estimate or can easily change. However, there are always some ideas that can inspire other museums to do so. Like, for example, the climate ticket, which was introduced by the Zeppelin Museum in Germany and was explicitly offered for the temporary exhibition Into the Deep, Minds of the Future. And visitors who have traveled to the museum by public transport, bicycle, or on foot had a 10% discount in the entrance of the museum and to see the exhibition. Public engagement, which is the most important aspect of what museums do, they are having all this type of gatherings of groups inside or outside the museum areas, like what does Manchester Museum, the Student Climate Cafe, which is a space open to university students who are especially worried about the climate crisis. Digital channels are also a very helpful means for communicating important aspects of climate crisis in a clear and easy to understand language to the public. This is an inside and digital tour made of 12 artworks and is offered by Thyssen-Bornemisza National Museum in Madrid, Spain, where actually it is proposed a thematic tour of selected artworks that encourage visitors to interrelate art and sustainable thinking. Many museums run sustainability blogs, like the Victoria and Albert Museum, or Natural History Museum has recently launched this Find Your Climate Action Tool, which is actually in beta format now for users to comment, and the museum can have some useful feedback on how to proceed with the final outline of this digital tool. Exhibitions, the most powerful and the most public-facing activity of museums, and especially museums can use their long-term or permanent collections as advocates for climate crisis. I will give you only 3 examples because there are numerous examples of how museums can use their collections. For example, in 2019, there was a campaign organized by the Prado Museum and the World Fund during COP25. And actually what they did is to take masterpiece of their collections and digitally transform it to a very dystopic idea of how the future should be by only if the temperature rises 1.5 degrees Celsius. The bit plastic pollution was a pop-up display in the aquarium of Horniman Museum and Gardens, which actually was very provocative for the time they realized it, because what they did, it was to empty all the fish tanks of the aquariums from the fishes and the jellyfishes that they had, and put instead plastic items in order to raise public awareness about the harm that plastic use and plastic pollution is creating to the biodiversity of oceans. Temporary exhibitions also are fully into raising awareness about climate crisis. This is an example of the exhibition Natural Us in Stafford House Museum in Switzerland, which was actually a very immersive and sensorial exhibition. Imagine that the visitors, when entering the exhibition, they had to remove their foot, going barefoot and experiencing different senses. So this is why we consider it as a very immersive and sensorial experience. Other museums like Victoria and Albert, which is basically a fashion museum, staged in 2018-2019 the exhibition Fashion from Nature. And it was a very bold experiment to show visitors about our uneasy relationships that exist between fashion and the environment. And basically, the exhibition highlighted that sustainability should be at the core of the design and what we can learn from the past to improve the future. This is an initiative that we did at the Archaeological Museum of Hania during the European Heritage Days in 2022, and it was called There Is No Planet B. It was actually a pop-up display where we have chosen 14 objects from the permanent collection of the museum and connect them with a Sustainable Development Goal 14, which represents life below water. The pop-up display was done in an effort to raise visitor awareness of the degradation of the marine ecosystem, and it was organized around 3 axes to make visitors think about the Mediterranean, the endangered species, and before consuming. So which are the levelers that optimize the sustainable transformation of museums? Funding opportunities. We heard a lot about funding, and funding indeed is one of the most important levers if we want to see the sustainable transformation of museum happenings. Many European countries nowadays, they have specific targeting culture activities projects, like for example the Zero Fund project in Germany, which is financially supporting cultural activities and exhibitions, like the exhibition we saw in the Zeppelin Museum. And this project runs until 2027. Until now, it has offered some quite amount of millions of euros for this type of activities. It's not only for staging an initiative that will raise public awareness, but also make this initiative in the most sustainable way. Networking is another important pillar when we are thinking about sustainable transformation, because all data we have so far shows that museums that participate in a certain network, cultural network that is tackling climate crisis, has more chances to be involved, knows better the framework, and has more tools to actually do this transformation. And national local policies is another leveler which helps a lot many museums to act more sustainably. For example, the Museum of Ethnography in Geneva, which is a municipal museum, is committed to follow the environmental policy of the city of Geneva. So the museum supports different initiatives that the city of Geneva applies, For example, the switch off in the night, in the middle of the night, and switch off all the lights and the advertisement boards outside the museum when the museum is closed. And now is already for years applying a zero paper policy for all its operation and activities. Museums can also serve as climate shelters. And currently, 12 museums in Barcelona have joined the network of the city of Barcelona as climate shelters. For example, the MACBA is taking part in this initiative, offering family and individual spaces for visitors to come and different activities for everyone who needs a shelter from the heat or cold. And finally, how can climate crisis be an opportunity for museums? First of all, museums should think climate crisis as developing a new museum culture. And climate crisis is offering this momentum because during this very turbulent period that we are crossing, museums can take advantage of climate crisis and reinvent their identity, what they are, and question traditional practices, how they do things, reflect and reevaluate their mission and vision, and strengthen their social role, bridge this divide that we discussed before, and give a collective understanding of culture and nature as one body. Discards all these false assumptions about neutrality, professionalism, loss of trust, and success. Success for museums, what means? All these type of blockbuster exhibitions to expand always in unsustainable ways their premises. Museums need to rethink and reframe the notion of success for them. It's about visitors and not about their premises. Abandon the unsustainable dependence on hyperproductivity and overgrowth. This is what a new definition of success means. Reshapes the codes of the working culture and build upon a new ethical museum ecology that brings as one body the love for culture and nature and effectively supports action towards the climate crisis. And C, climate action as an asset. Surveys demonstrate that sustainability accreditations would make visitors museums more positively and has economic benefits in the long run. And of course, this is the very moment for museums to take a seat on the table and actively influence governmental bodies and policymakers. During the COP conference in 2022 in Egypt, an ICOM representative was present in a committee a meeting with the different policymakers. And when she presented herself, the reaction from the other participant was, what do museum had to do with climate crisis? So museum had to do a lot with museum crisis and climate crisis and their new identity, and they have the tools to educate the public, to raise awareness, and to use their institutions and their trust for a very good reason to save the planet. I will leave you with these images that have nothing to do with all the catastrophic images we are seeing lately in the news. This is a project, a photographic project undertaken by UNESCO in last year. And as you can see, indeed, we do look so much like nature. Thank you so much.